Chapter 26. Do you, Keith Warren Ayer, take Dallas Celeste Henderson to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, till death do you part? The words seemed so simple, 2 of them, 2 little syllables, in fact. But the questions and concerns smashing into each other in the middle of his gut wouldn't let them find the air. The minister cleared his throat. Mr. Ayer? Huh? Keith asked, looking up at him as if he had no idea why he was standing there. Do you take Dallas to be your wife? Keith's gaze slid to her, and one question trumped all the others. He glanced at the preacher, and then at her. Finally, his gaze settled on the preacher. Hold that thought. I can call a tow truck, Greg said as they stood beside the road, examining the heap that used to be a car. I'm sorry. Maggie glanced at him. You were supposed to be at the wedding. I didn't mean to drag you into this. Hey, don't sweat it. I'd rather be out here with you than at some pretentious showboat wedding anyway. He smiled at her. Come on, let's get out of here. I'll call a tow truck to come get this. We can go back to my place. Panic seized her, but he just smiled. Don't worry, I'll behave myself. Keith, what do you think you're doing? Dallas asked in a barely contained screech as he dragged her from the garden into the little side room. Once there, she yanked her wrist free of his grip. This is not funny. I'm not laughing. He turned to her and put both hands on her arms, which were bare owing to the strapless wedding gown. Listen, I have to know something. Her eyes were wild with frustration. What? That you're insane? No. Sirius snapped through him. Listen to me, Dallas. I have to know something before we do this. What? What in the world is so important that you humiliate me in front of 600 people? Keith took a breath to settle the question in his heart. Do you believe in God? At that, even her anger fell into incomprehension. What? What kind of a question is that? I have to know. It's important to me. Dallas took that in, closed her eyes, and shook her head. Keith, this is crazy. What difference does it make if I believe in God or not? Just a simple yes or no, Dallas. That's all I need. She thought a little longer. Well, yeah, I guess so. I mean, what's not to believe? The answer wasn't really an answer, more of a question. Do you have faith that he'll get you through this life? I mean, does he factor into your decisions at all? Her gaze turned decidedly skeptical. God? His spirit was falling through her apathy toward the topic. Yeah, is he a real part of your life? I don't know. What do you want me to say? The truth, Dallas. I want the truth. The door swung open. What's going on in here? His father hissed. Please, Dad, we're in the middle of something. Yeah? Does the word wedding come to mind? His father asked. Please, Dad, just give us a minute. You don't have a minute, Keith. You are embarrassing me in front of half the state of Texas. Now get out here. Is everything all right? Vivian asked from outside. His father ducked out. Fine, Viv. Go sit down. Then, just before his father could rip into him again, Dallas turned knowing eyes on him. This is about her, isn't it? Her? What her? His father asked, coming back in. This is about that little tramp, that what's-her-name, Maggie. The name dripped like poison. Montgomery? His father asked as his eyes widened and too many pieces to count dropped into place behind them. Keith let his hands drop. It really wasn't about Maggie, but he would never be able to convince them of that. He sat back on something he couldn't have named had he tried. No, Dallas, this is not about Maggie. It's about we're not right for each other, and we never have been. We want different things from life. You want the money and the stuff that comes from being an Ayer, and he glanced at his father, wish I had never been born an Ayer. Keith Warren Ayer, don't you even talk like that. You are privileged to be a part of this family. His father nearly yelled, only stopping himself because of the 1,000 ears outside, no doubt listening for any sign of what was going on. It's a wonder I haven't thrown you out before now. Why, Dad? Because I wasn't good enough for you? Keith dragged his gaze up to his father's, and hate and loathing were all he saw there. Well, you know what? That's pretty remarkable coming from somebody who killed 3 people and walked away like it never happened. The punch landed hard and true. The condescension in his father's eyes fell away. What? How? What? You didn't think I'd ever find out? Keith asked. A haze of numbness, so that he couldn't really feel anything, fell over him. And I'm sure you threatened the others so they wouldn't tell me, or did you just pay them off to keep them quiet? His gaze came up and found Ike, standing just behind his father. The older cowboy couldn't meet his gaze, and he looked like he'd rather run than be there at that moment. Yeah, well, you almost covered your tracks good enough. His gaze dropped from Ike to his father. Almost. Keith, his father started. Keith pulled himself to his feet and stepped over to Dallas. When his gaze came up, it was with true regret. I'm really sorry you got mixed up in all of this, but us getting married isn't right, and it's a lie I'm not willing to try to live. He started to step past her. Keith, wait, Dallas said, her dress whooshing as she turned. Can't we get married now, just so these people won't know? We can always go down to City Hall and get a divorce tomorrow. It was so hard to believe he'd almost forced himself to say I do to her. No, Dallas, lying's not my style. With that, he turned instead to the inside door. A twist of the knob, and he walked away from the whole ugly horde of them forever. Can I get you something? Greg asked as Maggie sat on his couch, trying to get everything that had just happened to line up in her head. No, thanks. I've got Sprite, he said, a teasing quality edging the statement. She smiled up at him sadly and shook her head. Greg stood there looking down at her for the longest time. Then he spun and sat on the couch, a full cushion away. Okay, here's what I don't understand. Why didn't you just go for it with Keith? Dallas wasn't here. No one would ever have known. Maggie shook her head. The dreams she hadn't let herself acknowledge were there flowed through her even now. Keith isn't like that. Greg turned to her. That's just it. Keith is like that, or at least he was. All through high school and college, even after he met Dallas. Women were never an issue for him. He'd take what he wanted and never look back. Again, Maggie shook her head. That's not the Keith I know. He's sweet and kind, and he cares about people, not just on the outside, but about how they really are in here. She put her hand to her heart and then let it slide up her neck. At least, that's who I thought he was. With a twist, Greg took his jacket off and laid it on the couch arm, smoothing the fabric with his hand. However, halfway down it, he stopped. What? She asked, seeing his hesitation. Slowly, Greg reached into the folds and pulled out a little box. Something tells me they'll be wondering where these are. At that moment, Greg's cell phone on the counter beeped, and both gazes went to it. He stood, went to it, and answered it. Hello? Oh, Hi. His gaze traced to hers, and Maggie caught the implication. Panic surged through her as she shook her head. No, she whispered. Don't tell them I'm here. Greg turned to the phone call. No, man, I looked. I don't know where she went. Keith considered leaving the guest house. Dallas already had, amidst a hail of curses from both her and her parents. He stood there, absorbing them all as they gathered her things and left. They were right. He was good for nothing. He had led her on in hopes of making everyone believe he was something he was not. And he had let her down in the worst way imaginable. The only thing that could conceivably have been worse would have been if he had actually married her. When they were gone, he sat down in the chair and pulled the Bible from the little compartment. Something about the fact that it didn't have to be hidden anymore lifted his spirit from the muck ever so slightly. He let it fall open to no particular page. At 2 Peter, he started reading. He is patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance. Keith groaned with the reading and let his head fall back on the recliner. God, how could you be patient with me? Me, of all people. I've done such horrible things. I was so hurt, I didn't care who got hurt because of me. The pain of a life poorly lived knifed through him. Why don't you just put me out of my misery and get it over with? His hand slid the pages to the side as the anguish gushed over him. I'm not worthy of you, Lord. Can't you see that? His gaze fell to the words, even as tears blinded them from his sight. Because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ even when we were dead in transgressions. It is by grace you have been saved. Keith breathed in those words, read them again, and breathed some more. It was like inhaling God for the first time. I don't understand, God. I don't understand why you won't just let me drop. That's what I deserve. Again, his hands worked the pages, and his gaze fell to the words there. Where can I go from thy spirit, or where can I flee from thy presence? If I ascend to heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in Sheol, behold, thou art there. He didn't know where Sheol was, but he had a sneaking suspicion that God had been there and every other place Keith had ever been. God, for some inexplicable reason, seemed to be dogging his every step. Exhaustion was beginning to take over, but he let his fingers trace through the pages one last time. The red attracted his gaze. If any man is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. He who believes in me, as the scripture said, from his innermost being shall flow rivers of living water. Living water. What had the preacher said about filling that place, that hole, with anything other than God? That's what Keith felt like he'd been doing for all of 30 years. Filling and filling and filling. And always finding the hole empty. First, it was spending his father's money. Cars, women, wine. The world made it look so easy. Yet at the end of the day, at the end of every party, when he woke up in the morning in someone else's bed, the emptiness was always right there with him. It was just like that verse said, where can I run from it? It followed him. No, it didn't just follow him. It was a part of him. No, not even just that. It was him. He was the empty hole, waiting, hoping, wishing, pleading for something or someone to fill it. And still, it was empty until a young lady with funny glasses and shoes 2 sizes too big had stumbled into his life. He closed the Bible and ran his hand over it. The others had all given him themselves, for an hour, for a night. But she had given him something better, something he had been searching for his whole life. She had given him the answer to filling the hole. As if compelled by some force he didn't recognize, Keith got up and went to the phone. He dialed information, and in minutes he had the number for Del Rio. Home. Yes, Maggie would have gone home. The shower had felt good. It calmed her and warmed her. At least it had tried. True to his word, Greg had been nothing but kind. She knew he was still trying to sort everything out, but then again, so was she. Her hair still dripping, she walked into the living room, toweling it dry. Greg was sitting on the couch. He only glanced up when she entered. Keith called again. He's really worried about you. Huh. I can't believe he's not halfway to Hawaii by now. The deep concern of the brown eyes gathered her in. They didn't go through with it. The towel dropped 3 inches. What? Why not? Greg smiled. Same reason you took off. Keith's a basket case with worry. His gaze questioned her. Do you love him? There was no real way around the truth. Yeah, but it would never work between us. Why not? He loves you, you love him. Because, Greg, he's Keith Ayer. He's worth $1 gazillion. He rides around in limousines and trains $1 million racehorses. I'm some vagrant from the sticks who doesn't know a salad fork from a shrimp skewer. Slowly, Greg shook his head. Do you really think he cares about that? His family does. His family is not him. Maggie's gaze fell to the carpet as the drying continued. He really is worried about you. Panic seized her. You won't tell him where I am, will you? It took a minute, but Greg finally shook his head. No, not if you don't want me to. This has been Deep in the Heart, written by Staci Stallings. Narrated by Becky Dowdy of Brave Hearts Audiobook Productions. Copyright 2010 by Staci Stallings. Production copyright 2014 by Staci Stallings.
Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel so you never miss a second of the story.